here?
Has anyone here heard about Gorky 17?
Gorky 17 is a Polish turn-based strategy RPG published in 1999, and you probably haven't heard of it. And I wouldn't blame you, because 1999 was a pretty good year for PC gaming. Maybe these ring a bell. Homeworld, System Shock 2, Unreal Tournament, Planescape Torment. Pretty stiff competition, and I wouldn't blame anyone for having their hands full with any of those classics. And you might not have heard of it for other reasons, such as its arbitrary name change. Gorky 17 is also known as Odium in North America. Gorky is an interesting game, and while it's probably not a good game, I think it fills a unique niche that was left open in the late 90s PC gaming market. In this not quite a review video, I'm going to spoil some things for an old game you probably aren't and probably shouldn't play, but stay with me because this thing is wild. Any story I spoil here is done with intent, because I think the storytelling in this game is really strange, and the story beats from the final chapters would have been much better suited to initial world building and plot development. So, trust me? I won't ruin anything terribly important, so if this video inspires you to check out this little oddity of a game, jump to the timestamp in the description if you don't want anything to be spoiled, but look, you'd be missing out. In Gorky, you control a small team of NATO operatives who are investigating the appearance of some strange hybrid creatures in a small Polish town. We know there's some shenanigans occurring in the nearby military base, but no information is getting in or out of here. Well, it turns out that scientists have discovered a dormant gene within the human body that's been slowly waking up with each passing generation. We don't know how or why, but when fully awoken, it's surely to destroy humanity as we know it. So what better way to cure us all than to invest heavily into teleportation technology to teleport the genes out of us? This has the unfortunate side effect of causing the teleportation virus, which slowly morphs anybody who's been yeeted through physical space to turn into these horrific creatures.
But unlike the others, I kept my sanity.
This is the dumbest sci-fi plot device I've ever experienced, and I am here for it. That's all you need to know about the story. The game itself has many parallels to old school Resident Evil, with its pre-rendered backdrops, sprinkling with puzzles and general vibe of surreal horror mixed with corporate mystery. It attempts a mix of point-and-click horror with strategy RPG, and I think it does a pretty okay job at it. Like Resident Evil, ammo and health items are limited, so there's a very real chance you could run out of resources to complete the game, dramatically adding to the tension of each encounter. You often have to make difficult decisions on whether to conserve ammunition or take extra damage from a creature. There are no healing or safe rooms here, so any damage you take must be healed with a finite number of health items. Monster designs are ridiculous, ranging from horrific to laugh out loud stupid. Just look at this guy with his stupid little horn. And this?
This one, it is sad. They should have thrown it back when it was born.
The same goes for voice acting, which both carries a generally decent horror quality, but has some pretty wonky moments.
Wouldn't get here sooner. You weren't easy to find, though we've located your teammates.
Oh god, I'm going to die! I die in this hole!
Combat pacing feels just about right. While it can drag on near the end, it's reactive enough, and I only really started to feel myself getting frustrated in the final chapter due to the sheer amount of encounters. Every character could move and perform a single action. They could fire, defend, push, or use a support item. There's a pleasant mix of weapons to play around with too, and characters learn to better use these weapons the more they attack with them. When it's the enemy's turn, the HUD actually disappears. I actually really liked this because it amped up the tension every time. Am I going to have enough health to withstand that creature firing its weapons into my demolition expert's ass? Watching the damage numbers pop up and dreading the game over screen following it kept me really hooked. With that being said, there are too many encounters. As someone who typically doesn't enjoy point-and-click style exploration, it actually really stood out to me that I was craving more of the non-combat sections of the game. I think this speaks to the quality of the game world and overall art direction. It's really quite pleasant in an eerie way. Puzzles aren't frustrating, and finding more ammunition or a new weapon always felt good. Because as the player, you're made to feel like you're stretching resources constantly. Just finding 3 more shotgun shells felt great, because that's going to make life a lot easier for you during your next encounter or two. There's just so much combat. You never know when an encounter is going to pop up, and while they aren't random encounters as such, they really feel like it. On the bright side, combat being predetermined like this allows the game to present somewhat balanced fights with some occasionally interesting setups. The pacing could be better, allowing you to lap up more of the heavy atmosphere the game offers in its other portions though. Alongside combat being a little tedious, character leveling just doesn't feel all too satisfying or meaningful. Every time you deal damage, you earn some experience points. You can then dump them into a handful of stats: HP, accuracy, counter rate, etc. It seems like the most efficient stat to level is luck, because as far as I could tell, it had a carryover effect onto accuracy, as critical hits could never miss. Calmness also felt completely useless, as low calmness would increase the chance of you entering the enraged state, which didn't seem like too much of a penalty as it actually boosted your melee attack at the cost of reducing accuracy. Given you're using melee attacks a lot in this game, I left that mostly untouched. It works, and it's fine. The game has an interesting meta whereby you're encouraged to stun creatures and hit them constantly with melee weapons because you need to conserve ammunition. Eventually you can have multiple characters with tasers and tranquilizer darts, which causes combat to slow down to a crawl as you position your team to stun lock the enemy composition and whittle them down with baseball bats. This is especially problematic during the later stages of the game, where this strategy has been reinforced by the game's specific combat setups, only for it to start throwing stun immune enemies at the player. There's no prior indication that these enemies will behave any differently, so I often had to restart multiple encounters. It just takes needless time. It wouldn't be much of an issue without the permanency of wasting items, but with how this game focuses on limited resources, it's much easier to restart than waste a bunch of healing items on a mistake after the fight. But you know, I actually really like this game. It's not often something like this really sticks with me. Maybe it was the dark electro ambient soundtrack mixed with the surreal monster designs. Maybe it was the unique spin on survival horror that I still haven't seen done quite like this. Maybe I just like bad games with ridiculous plots. This game is just so incredibly on brand for me. It's definitely got some huge problems, and it's mediocre in so many ways, but it's charming, and I dare say you'll have not played anything quite like it. So all things considered, I think this is a premium example of a hidden gem. It came out during a time where some real heavy hitters were dominating the PC gaming scene, and from a studio very few people will be aware of. It mimics the likes of Resident Evil in its approach to horror and resource management, while providing a pretty streamlined gameplay experience through a story that ranges between mediocre and great, but never quite bad. It's silly, but there's silly horror and there's serious horror, and you know, if I'm playing a game to have fun, give me that silly horror any day of the week. Gorky 17's a weird game you probably shouldn't play, but I'd love it if you did.